Here's a question for you. Are all submissions in jiu-jitsu equal? Meaning, I knee bar you, you rear naked choke me. Were those equal? Or I submit you with a straight arm lock, you submit me with an ankle lock. Are those equal? Well, certainly in the training room, they're equal because a tap is a tap. Certainly in competition, they are equal because a tap is a tap. You don't get more points for hitting a rear naked choke than you do a wrist lock. But should there be a hierarchy? Should all submissions be equal? I don't think so. Let's talk about it. So the inspiration for today's video, the question of whether techniques are equal or submissions are equal, came from the work that I've been doing over the past few months with Javier Vazquez. Javier is a former UFC fighter. He's a 5th degree black belt in jiu-jitsu, and he is insanely skilled. Very, very high level jiu-jitsu. He is a master of the game of jiu-jitsu. He can teach anything. And so he and I produced a course called The Principles of Dominance and Control. It's an incredible course. It's been actually very influential in my own game. I've been implementing some of his techniques and methodologies with great success. But it brought this question to the forefront of, are techniques equal? Because if you look at the way that he teaches jiu-jitsu, what he advocates for, and the way he plays jiu-jitsu, especially if he's playing his A game, well, it's a very simple recipe that he advocates for. The recipe is you get your opponent to turn their back, you get onto their back and get control of them, you get hand control and you get those hands locked up so they can't be used to defend, and then you get a rear naked choke. And he has elevated that game to a very, very elegant and sophisticated system. I mean, he is brilliant at getting people to turn their back. And if you ask him, why does he play jiu-jitsu that way? Well, the answer is very simple, because he used to be a mixed martial artist. And when there are punches and strikes, the game of jiu-jitsu changes. And if your goal is to end the fight decisively, well, the choke is king. The rear naked choke, a blood choke, is absolutely king of the hill. You get into a self-defense situation, the person's on fentanyl, they're on, crystal meth, whatever. They might not feel any pain. And you armbar them, you break their arm. There's no guarantee that that's going to have any effect on their ability to continue to fight. They might not even notice that you broke their arm. On the other hand, if you can get a choke and you put them to sleep, game over. I mean, that is the single most reliable way to end a fight. For those of us that train jiu-jitsu in kind of a sporting context, and really most jiu-jitsu academies, whether they are sport academies or not sport academies, we are playing a friendly style of jiu-jitsu on the mat. And the way that each one of us develops our game is going to be a little bit unique. There are certain techniques that define my game. There's, a bunch of stuff that I love to do, and I've organized all that into kind of a cohesive system. But that might be different than the way that someone else plays jiu-jitsu. It might be different than the way that you play jiu-jitsu. You might be a wrist locker. You might be a leg locker. You might be someone that loves the triangle from mount. But this question of whether all of that is equal is never really asked in a jiu-jitsu environment, in a training room. Because if you get the tap, you get the tap. If you get the tap with a wrist lock, it's still a tap. But if you can zoom out a little bit and begin thinking of your game more globally and thinking about what is the primary goal of jiu-jitsu. The primary goal is a self-defense system. Well, in a self-defense context, as I just talked about, submissions aren't equal. Positions aren't equal. The best position's the back. The second best position is mount, when you mount somebody. Why? Because they can't punch you and you can punch them. It's a very dominant position. The mount is actually, I consider it an advanced position because it's actually a difficult position to maintain. It takes some skill, it takes some practice, it takes some training. Side control is a much easier position to begin to master in terms of controlling somebody than mount. And so if you build a game in which you're not very good from mount, you've got other things that you tend to do more frequently, or you have a game that's not, in which you're trying to get to the back, well, those are going to be deficiencies in your game. And full disclosure, I have never been a big back player myself. I get to the back. I choked someone out the other day with a rear naked choke. So I do get to the back. I've got a decent back triangle. I have a decent arm bar from the weak side if I have the back. But it's not the primary position that I look for. I tend to find myself on the back sometimes, if I'm playing half guard bottom, I'll rotate to the back. I'll get to the back. But it's not something that I think of in a hierarchy where, yep, the back is number one. That's where I want to be. And my work with Javier has made me kind of rethink my own game a little bit, or at least expand my own game so that even though there are things that I love to do, I'm a leg locker, for example, I love the leg game. Well, that's okay to continue to play that game, but understand that you should be developing the ability to play a game that's more suitable when punches are being thrown. And if you've never grappled with punches, you're in for a rude awakening. Back when I ran my school, we had a bin with like 20 MMA gloves, 20 pairs. And periodically we would put on the gloves, and you're not trying to hurt anyone. You're just, trying to tag people just to keep it honest. And you will be shocked at what a difference it makes, from everywhere in jiu-jitsu. We don't keep our faces and our heads safe a lot of times from the positions that we're in when there are punches available to be thrown, because there's no penalty for that in a jiu-jitsu school. And so I would advocate looking at your game more globally and building the capability to have game plans that can be executed depending on the situation, right? I've got my self-defense game plan, which is get to the back, get to mount, but especially get to the back so you can finish the fight. And if you're not very good from those positions, well, you've got some work to do. And so I encourage you to kind of think about your game a little bit more globally and try to find those areas where you are at risk for getting punched, getting hurt if there are strikes, and shoring those things up and developing the ability to play, a good back game, a good mount game, because those are primary. There are a lot of guys that have sneaky jiu-jitsu games. They try to hit wrist locks from the bottom. They do sneaky stuff from weird positions. And, I do a little bit of that, mostly to elicit a response, right? Sometimes you're stuck somewhere and you try to wrist lock someone just to get a reaction, and that gives you an opening where you can then escape. So I'm not saying those things are necessarily bad, but if you build a game based on sort of sneaky techniques, or you build a game based on unorthodox things, well, is that game going to serve you well if you really have to use your jiu-jitsu in a self-defense encounter? So think about that. And we all have work to do. I mean, this is an evolution. We are all attempting to make ourselves better and more effective, but I think it's important to never lose sight of the fact that fundamentally jiu-jitsu is a combat art. It's a grappling martial art that has combat roots. And within that context, certainly positions are not equal. All right, thanks for watching.